Right, hello and welcome to the Panachecast. I'm Peter Davis and this is Panache Software's weekly podcast, bringing you the latest news and events in the world of legal tech. This is episode 4, and on this week's show we'll be talking to you about EY, or maybe better known in its previous carnation of Ernst & Young, and its acquisition of Thomson Reuters' 1,000-strong managed legal services team, law firms getting it right on social media. And then we've got another topic on data, where we've got a couple of articles from the Raconteur talking about data, and we'll examine what you can measure, how to use it, and then crucially, how are you going to monetize it. But before we get into that, welcome to my co-host Neil Pemberton.
Thanks, Pete. Back for another weekly episode of Panachecast. It's great to be here. We got the video quality right last week. We think much better than previous weeks, but the number of YouTube views has gone down. So I don't know what that says about how we look.
Yeah, I know. I was going to say maybe we're better when we're out of focus. I don't know. That's possible. But
yeah, maybe we go back to blurred vision and then we'll get more viewers.
Yes.
But fortunately, it seems as though the listeners have gone up on all the other platforms that we're on. So overall, the trend is in the right direction, and hopefully that continues. Yeah. But, you know, hopefully we get more and more views and listens because of the program getting better, and we want the feedback from you. If you can give that to us, we really appreciate it. We've had some good stuff and we continue to get some good stuff. And if you have any comments, then do please send it to us. The email address is panachecast@panachesoftware.com. We have put this out on not just YouTube, but it's also available on, well, you can get links to it through LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We're on most of the social media platforms, and we will, if you just search for Panache Software on there, you will find us.
You should be able to find us,
yeah. But we also publish this on Spotify, the Apple Podcast, and most importantly for us, our Patreon account. If you want to look up Patreon, it's Patreon. Again, search for us. It's patreon.com/Panache Software, I think. But if you find us on there, go and have a look at that. That's what's hosting everything for us. That's where we put most of our most of the effort into that. It's
all the content goes on there.
All the content goes onto that. And if you like what you hear and you can support us, then we'd really appreciate that. But go along there. You can click the follow button and you'll get notification of everything that comes out from us.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. Yeah, as I said, that's we're intending to keep all of the shows that we do. At the moment, we're doing our weekly news podcast. We're looking to do more than that as well, and offer a couple of sort of deeper dives into topics, and hopefully coming soon some interviews with other individuals and things. So that will all go onto Patreon and stuff, and we're aiming to keep everything free, so to get it out there for you. But if you want to support us, then have a look on the Patreon site and sign up on there for follows or anything else. But yeah. Other than that, shall we get on to the news? And what's first up?
Well, first up, as you mentioned earlier, we've got lots of big news. It's covered in lots of different sources. I quote from City AM, which was authored by James Booth. EY continues expansion into law with Thomson Reuters managed legal services acquisition.
I think everyone covered that this week.
Everyone's covered that.
Yeah.
It's big news because that's quite a big, strong team. Thomson Reuters are big players within the legal market, and particularly the legal tech market. EY seem to be on somewhat of an acquisition spree at the moment, if you can call 2 acquisitions, but big acquisitions a spree. Last August, they bought Riverview, I think it is, Riverview Law, which had a relatively strong tech aspect to it. Now, just to quote from the City AM article, it says the acquisition was of 1,000-strong managed legal service business from Thomson Reuters, making the top 4 accountancy firm a big push into the legal sector. The EY chairman and chief executive said the acquisition is an example of how EY is working to provide clients with holistic solutions which are enabled by technology. So it fits neatly into what we want.
Yeah.
I wanted to just talk about the size of this EY and the other big 4, the other 3 of the big 4 accountancy firms, because they are huge. And if you were to look at the numbers, and again, this is from a different City AM article, but they quote the following number of lawyers at PwC as 2,500, KPMG as 2,200, EY 2,200. I think that was pre this acquisition. I don't know whether they class the managed legal services as lawyers. So maybe that's 3,200 now. I'm not sure.
Might be.
But Deloitte is 1,800. So in terms of the numbers of lawyers, if you just Google, largest law firms in the world, and you'll come across a Wikipedia page which you can reorder, the PwC would be ranking at about 11th or 12th, so close to the top 10, and all the other three are certainly within the top 25. Most of them are larger than the Magic Circle firms, which are the big firms that are held up as the examples. And in terms of the revenue of these firms, the big four accountancy firms, they have revenues, depending on where you look at it, it's between about $30 and $40 billion, versus the biggest law firms in the world have revenues of around $3 billion. So these firms are 10 times bigger. Now that includes
the largest law firms.
Yeah, that includes their other features, their other functions as well, accountancy and audit and so on. But it's not an insignificant move into the legal space, and it will present challenges, I'm sure, for law firms.
Yeah, I mean, we've discussed this previously. It's these organisations like PwC, like EY, they're already engaged with businesses and corporations at the moment, offering other services. If they're looking to make acquisitions and things like that, these accounting firms will be handling those kind of things. And now, not only from doing those aspects, they can also provide via, in this instance especially via EY, they can offer a managed legal service solution to those people as well. Is this a threat to the more established law firms and stuff? Even by mergers and acquisitions and stuff within those top law firms, they'll still be smaller than some of the legal sides of these larger accounting firms.
I think it does issue a threat. I mean, look at managed legal services. If you Google that term, you get a couple of the sort of the higher tier firms, and Evershed Sutherland are mentioned for their ES Ignite, and Adelshaw Goddard are mentioned for AG Optimize. That is their version of managed legal services. Now, they actually rank higher in the Google search that I did than PwC and EY and others, but there are relatively few that came up. So that was interesting. And this is work which is maybe managed legal services is dealing with more straightforward transactions and
the sort of bulk transactions, when there's a lot of
slightly more
smaller things to do. More
of a cookie cutter approach to it, and where there's less negotiation. So it's processed and it fits neatly within automation. So I think that probably is a very significant threat to the firms, largely because so few of them are doing a good job at advertising that they have them. And I suspect that with the weight and power that someone like a PwC and an EY have behind them, the resource that they have in terms of their marketing, and if you go onto LinkedIn, you can find a lot of stuff about EY on their LinkedIn page, and talking about digitization of their data and so on. They're really pushing this quite hard.
Yeah, and it seems to me, with everyone's looking to cut costs in areas now. That I think things like these managed legal services and stuff are going to become big business. I mean, we're all used to, in most organisations you go to now, have their IT services are managed by someone else. Almost in all of the organisations I deal with, it's long ago you would always have IT support as part of that company. They're not anymore. Same with HR and payroll and aspects like that. Those are now handled outside. Now it would appear that those legal services as well, why have your own internal legal team when you can get a managed service from someone like these organisations? And why go to the more established firms to get these services when actually another organisation who you're already engaged with, who you've already built that trust up with, you've likely got people from PwC in doing consultancy, advising on technologies and other management practices and things, and accounting and stuff. Go with them as well. They can offer you the legal side of things. So
they will certainly be pushing it, won't they? I mean, if they're first on the scene in terms of advising clients because they're auditing their books all the time, why wouldn't they be pushing their own legal arm? And that will include not just the legal managed services, but it will include your more traditional advice as well, and more traditional services. They'll be able to provide all of that. So it will be a significant challenge to it. And I wonder how the law firms are going to keep up with that. And we mentioned a couple of weeks ago about maybe a new stream of incorporations onto stock markets and flotations. We mentioned DWF, and there are others, Gately's and so on, as a way of raising funds. And in terms of the DWF one, they said, I think it was 10 out of 85 or 75 million pounds worth was going to go on IT spend. But they're going to have to try and get engagement with clients sooner, I think, in order to not be left behind. Because if these firms are expanding their legal services and their offering, and we're only talking about the top 4 as well. There are plenty of others like Mazars, Grant Thornton, RSM, which used to be known as Baker Tilly, I think. We haven't done an awful lot of research on them, but they must surely be thinking the same thing. And if they're not, I'm sure they will at some point in the near future, expanding into the legal space. So if they're going to be first on the scene, as with the other ones, I think we've got a potentially changing landscape coming here.
Yeah, and one of the things that we've had to think about as well is, if there's these larger organisations who are providing legal services outsourced that also have big technology aspects to them. I know PwC, I have involvement elsewhere with them offering technology services and things like that for things like will writing and other smaller scale things that we see now being taken up by automated solutions and things like that. Those are the kind of the bread and butter services for the small law firms. You want to get a will written, you're probably going to go to your local high street solicitor to get that. But now are other organisations that provide things like insurance services. I think about people like the AA, who we may have home insurance covered with, but when you buy that, you also get offered life insurance and things like that bundled together. Are these organisations also going to say, well, now using these managed legal services from other firms, can we also offer will writing services? You buy a house, you also get that service as well. And is that going to eat into sort of the local smaller firms? Because these bigger organisations who are already engaged with a customer can now just bundle in additional legal services.
Yeah, I suspect for anyone who is interested in price, and most people are interested in price as one of their first things, it will say, I'll go with where I think the job's got to be done competently, of course, but if the price can be done, if the work can be done for a relatively cheap price at someone like EY, now they might want to be interested in that level of service, but if they can do it and make money out of it, then why not? And what I've found before is that working within a firm, if there's a private client aspect to that firm, you still have your commercial and corporate clients coming to you and asking for advice in their individual capacity. You have that a lot. You either say, we don't do that, and so you need to go elsewhere, and it's not really a good idea to be sending business outside of the doors unless you have to, because you're not suitably qualified to do it. But I wouldn't be the least bit surprised to see these people tackling everything, and including those sorts of commoditized products like wills. And there are lots of legal solutions out there that already do will writing for people. And maybe they'll swallow one of those up. I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, maybe. And I mean, just before we move on, I guess we should just also do a quick thing. What does this mean for Thomson Reuters as well? It would seem, I know they've got new products coming out, their new panoramic product for workflow and pricing that they're beginning to push now. It would seem from these kind of things that this is a way of them moving further into the technology space, to be more of just a technology and software organization, rather than providing these other kinds of services as well.
They still have that sort of quasi advisory bit in that they have PLC, the practical law company, where they hold a lot of precedents and that sort of intel, the information that you need to run your practice and your various businesses. But it seems to be a big push to the technology side, insofar as they are distancing themselves from the managed services. So, if they're offloading that shows a much more of a narrow focus on the technology.
Yeah, and I guess a way for them to create more investment for them to invest internally for additional products and solutions.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see what comes down the line for them as well.
Absolutely.
On that factor.
Yeah. So let's move quickly then on to item number 2, which is Natasha wrote into us last week and was talking about social media and law around social media advertising and whatnot. And we just distinguish from that slightly insofar as that we'll be talking about law tech rather than tech law. But this is an article that we found from Wise Stamp from Simcha Lazarus. And the title is 8 Law Firms Getting Social Media Right. What's interesting I found from this was that I've actually only heard one of the firms before, which was number 7 on the list of 8, which was Freshfields, Brookhouse, Derringer. But the list, I'll just read some of the entries. If you want the detail for all of it, then you can go to the show notes and you can find a link for it there. And you can have a look. But what was interesting about this list is that it talks about all the different types of social media, whether it's Twitter or Facebook or YouTube, and what you can do with those.
Yeah.
But so she's picked out a couple of them. The second one I wanted to talk about, Blumenreich law firm applies the 80-20 rule of social media. They make 80% of the content that they put out about the customers, insofar as they're answering questions, retweeting links, and sharing content that's useful for the customers. And only 20% of their content is about sales, i.e. their own products.
Yeah.
I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
The Strom law firm has got a chat box on their website. Some are posting a lot of videos on YouTube and have video catalogs. Lots of keywords used. The Freshfields one talks about engaging career page and videos. And the final one, Push or Mitchell, talks about having a blog. So the thing that cropped up for me from this article was each of these, there is a bit of overlap between them, but by and large, they're all using a slightly, or at least the focus is on a slightly different type of social media. There are so many different choices. Where do you even begin to decide what you're going to use?
Yeah, and that's a difficult question to get right at the moment. Yeah. And I think it's especially difficult when you're approaching this from organizations that maybe aren't familiar with these kind of platforms. We look at social media platforms like Facebook, like Twitter, as being a young person's platform. And it may be sort of normal to say that we assume that all law firms are sort of run by stuffy partners, who have been there for donkey's years and have no idea about this technology. But I think what we need to take out of this is that things are changing on this front now, and that a lot of people now, these social media platforms are their window into the internet, basically. These are the first port of call. Rather than searching for a website, Googling of legal firm's website, they'll be looking on the platforms that they use on a day-to-day basis or an hour-to-hour basis or more. And it's about going where those customers are. Those customers are now on these platforms. And I think you're right. The key thing on here was saying, that a lot of these, or one of these firms, they concentrate on more about just tweeting and engaging with their customers and answering their questions, rather than just posting sales stuff, rather than putting a post up saying, here's our new product, and just detailing what we can say or what we can sell you. These are looking at actually engaging with their audience, and I think that's a very important part. And it's something that, one of the reasons why we started this podcast as well,
definitely,
to try and have a conversation with people, to engage with people. It's very easy to look at, law firms as, being in a big building, posh offices, and lots of people in suits hidden away who you don't get access to, or if you do you have to pay a lot to get access to. Whereas what it's clear is that you really need to now be able to actually fundamentally engage with these people on the platforms they're using.
Yeah, definitely. I think if you read any sales material, and we will cover sales stuff in a future show and maybe one of the Panachecast extra shows, they all talk about the engagement factor and consultative selling rather than just the old school 70s, 60s, 70s Tupperware type selling. You need to buy this and it's great because it's got all these features. That's not what people are looking for, and no one wants to be sold. So the better ones are the ones that are putting information out which is useful for their client. Yes. And we had a little scout around earlier, and it's actually quite difficult. We looked at Instagram just to see who's on Instagram, because that isn't necessarily the one that would immediately spring to mind. You
might not think, if you're a big legal firm, why would I post on Instagram? Well,
I think
it's a photo sharing.
Just a photo sharing thing. A lot of people probably don't even know what it is. People will know what it is, but they mightn't necessarily have it at the forefront of their mind. Several people who I'm sure are influential and decision makers at law firms won't have an Instagram account, so they probably never see half of the stuff. But customers are on there. Lots of customers on there. And
future customers.
Yeah, future customers. Yeah, exactly. People who are young now. Well, when we had a look around, we saw very, very little engagement, or in fact, in some cases, no engagement and no profile from some of the magic circles. Now, we limited it to those, but and even if you type in the names, you aren't necessarily going to that firm's page, are you? You're going to maybe the recruitment aspect.
Yeah, and one of the ones, Freshfields, it says on here, had an engaging career page, and I think when we looked for Freshfields, that's the Instagram account we found, was just their career Instagram for graduates.
Exactly. But if you compare that to some others, and we have a follower on our Instagram page, Keosian Law LLP. I may have said that wrong. Sorry if I have. But they've got 22,500 followers on Instagram. Yeah. Now, they're based in California, and they're doing... they're a litigation firm. But, they're out, and maybe they're looking at things slightly differently, because when people are on social media, they like to tell their woes, don't they, quite a lot, especially on Facebook. Maybe you're at home, sitting at home with a broken leg, and it's not your fault. If you suffered an injury at work and it wasn't your fault, well, there are people at home who have suffered injuries at work and it wasn't their fault, who need representation. And, if they find you on there, then they may give you a call. Yeah,
and it's important to, we can have a little laugh about the types of that type of firm and, what they're supplying. But, the numbers speak for themselves. They have 22,500 followers on there. Yeah. When they post an update, that's potentially 22,500 people see that. Yep. So you have to ask yourself, when you post something, a new blog on your website or a new white paper or anything like that, how many people actually see this? Yep. I would estimate it's not going to be 22,500 people.
Not many.
So, by going onto these platforms, by engaging with that audience, it's not free advertising, but it gives you a group who are there who will just see everything that you post. But again, I think we have to talk about the type of engagement you make on there as well. It's not just about posting the latest news of the company and how great the company is doing. The key thing, and what we keep coming back, is it's engaging with your audience on there. Yeah. There's lots of other firms that outside of law, just normal companies, who have very active social media engagement, whereby if someone has a question to ask that firm, or just wants to talk to someone, they will tweet at that firm or organization. They will send a message through Facebook, and more often than not, they will quite often get a reply. Yeah. Now, I would assume that for right or for wrong, a lot of large law firms look fairly faceless in that organization, and there's issues with what you can engage with someone on when it actually comes to legal matters. But I think that just having that voice on there where you can actually talk to people will be hugely beneficial, and not just for the large firms, for smaller firms. I think it's a huge thing. In your local area, If you're a high street firm, get onto the local pages, create your Instagram account, and don't just have it as selling your company. I mean, we have the same thing here. As Panache Software, we're working on our legal platform and stuff, which we will talk about now. But we've decided very clearly that this podcast is not talking about us, not being a sales pitch for what we're doing. We want to have a conversation with people.
No, absolutely, that's right. And we'll come on to in the next section a little bit more about finding the information that you might want to talk about. But making it customer centric is really, really important. I mean, what's Amazon's tagline? Earth's most customer centric company or something like that.
Yeah.
Well, you can't really go wrong following that, I don't expect, could you? If you are putting stuff out for your clients that's for them and it's not for you, and it's interesting information for them, and it solves a problem that they don't have to pay you for, doesn't sound particularly good as a general business model up front, but it will probably work and pay dividends in the long run. I think putting more content on those, and maybe targeting as well the places which aren't necessarily associated with professional services. LinkedIn, of course. I mean, if you're not on LinkedIn, you'll be missing a big trick. But it isn't necessarily about applying to just LinkedIn. There are plenty of others, aren't there? And you can find ways of linking the things together. Programs like Hootsuite or something will help you manage all these things.
And most things, once if you post in one place, it will post in other places as well. And it's just getting out there and having that more personable approach to things.
Well, I mean, in terms of what you could post, I mean, if you take, for example, you've got a client that comes to you with a really tricky problem, you can't just post that you solved this problem for Mr. Jones and these are all the details of it. Of course you can't, but there's case studies that are available, and that's probably what should be going into things like blogs. I mean, if you're specializing in a particular type of law or practice, you're probably, hopefully, you can become known as an expert in that by posting about jobs that you've done that were particularly difficult and challenging, and success stories. I mean, there are some firms that do very, very specific things, like challenging the NHS for funding when funding has been refused. Well, if you are at home looking for funding for something, for NHS treatment, and you get turned down, you can either wither and accept it, or you could go, okay, well, I'm going to search if there's an alternative. And if you are a firm that has got a blog and YouTube videos and a LinkedIn account and all the rest of it, all the social media, the variety of it will cross-link, won't it? So that you get higher rankings on things like Google, so that when you search for help with NHS funding or legal help with NHS funding, I'm not picking on just that, but any number of unusual, not mainstream services, you can be found.
And that's right. And I think it's appreciating that you need to go to where your audience is, and not everyone just simply goes to Google anymore to search for things. They sit in their platforms. So being available on there is the key thing. And I think it covers not just the social media presence, but also looking at things like your corporate websites and things like that. Looking for details on the Ernst & Young, the EY acquisition and stuff, following down the trails on Thomson Reuters products on the Panoramic. I went to Thomson Reuters sites, I looked under their project, their product tab. Panoramic wasn't listed under there. I had to do a separate search to find it. It was then listed as part of Thomson Reuters Elite and things like that. And these things get confusing. There was another product on there which had a pricing page. I clicked on the pricing page. There was no pricing information. It's just free trials and then how to get in contact to discuss those things. Now, we understand that pricing isn't necessarily something you want to put out on the web page, but I think a lot of these, certainly the larger organizations, they have large product suites which have come from acquisitions and multiple developments, and it's difficult to present one face to this. But going to your websites, there's confusion on there, and it's maybe looking at these aspects and saying, okay, how can we trim this down? We know that most companies are going to have account managers which talk to the larger clients, but if I'm a small firm, and I'm potentially looking for a product in this area, and I go to the site and I'm just bewildered by which of these products should I buy, I don't really want to talk to a salesman, to be quite honest. I mean, how many times have you gone to a website looking for the cost of something, and there's been a contact us button to find that, and you just move on to the next place?
Price on application means I'm moving straight on to the next one.
Exactly. So it's thinking not just about your social media presence, but also about your general internet presence and tidying up these aspects, making things less confusing, and trying to be more upfront with the information so that people can just find what they want. And they're more likely to contact you in these situations.
Well, just on pricing quickly, we obviously mentioned a couple of weeks ago about the SRA rules on transparency. So there has to be some element of transparency for you. But maybe it's an opportunity to be creative about it. I mean, yes, you could offer fixed and flat fees for certain things. Maybe you could offer contingency fees. I mean, there are all kinds of different ways to do it. But thinking about how you follow that through into a social media exercise, rather than just saying our fees for this are X, maybe you say, well, we're happy to work with you and within your budget, and maybe we can take, you end up potentially getting into consumer credit issues, but, staged payments or whatever. I mean, there are lots of options, and those are things that will be better for customers ultimately. And so, think about how you can run that kind of thing through a social media exercise. Yeah,
definitely. It's a really interesting thing. And, I think that, the things you bring up there about the pricing transparency is something we looked at last week, and I think also follows on to the sort of final item we were going to talk about, which comes from the Raconteur, which is the future of data. I think that particular article was, but it also follows on from a previous and older edition, which also was entitled Cloud for Business, which also covered data. And things like that.
So there was a good article in there, and it's not directly relevant, but you'll stick with us and you'll see the relevance, I think, as we go through. I'm going to quote from it, and it says, this is the 11th of December 2018 edition of the Raconteur. The most innovative companies in the world, including Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, and Google, are not only underpinned by the cloud, but recognize that their whole business model is based upon data. Indeed, Netflix said in 2016 that its cloud-based recommendation engine, powered by user data, is worth more than $1 billion annually. So how do you feel about $1 billion, Pete?
I'd feel quite happy with $1 billion.
I'd feel quite happy about it. Critical from that is, they done nothing with their data, and they just provided a streaming video service, an online Blockbuster, if you will, for people that can remember Blockbuster. They would have gained nothing. That $1 billion would have been lost.
And it's an interesting thing. I mean, when you look at these kind of companies, when you look at something like Netflix, you may say, well, how can they have a business model which is based on data when all they're doing is streaming video? But I think you have to peel these things back, and you have to look deeper when you're talking about the data that your organization can gather. For someone like Netflix, yes, they stream video, but that's powered by user data, so they know about their users. They know the age of the users. They know the location of the user generally. That's pretty easy for looking at an accounting page. But then they know exactly what you're watching. They know how long you watch those things for, when you watch those things. So if you go to view a series on Netflix and you only get 5 minutes through the first episode and decide this isn't for me and go and look for someone else, Netflix knows that. They know that you didn't finish that episode, and they know what you went to from that episode. And if you go back to it, that's important information for TV producers and things. They can tell what people are watching and when, and how long people watch for. Do you have a series which is 6 episodes long? People binge watch it all in one go. You can tell that information. Or is it a longer series and you find that people drop in and out of it? All of this information is key to not necessarily for Netflix, but for the people who are creating these shows and, importantly, advertising these shows. You can tell if you run advertising if that's had an impact based on what people have watched on Netflix. And so I think what we want to look into here is, how can we do the same for legal data?
Yeah. Well, that's difficult for me. I mean, when I was trying to think about this for myself, I thought, well, so what information do I have? What data do I have that I can monetize? It's all about the money, isn't it? At the end of the day.
In the end of the day, that's
so I've got information about Mr. and Mrs. Jones, and they bought the property and they sold the property. So I've got the postcodes. I've got how long, and my own. So there's client data, and then there's your own personal data, right? There's how long it took you to get the file open, closed, billed. There's how long the transaction took you generally. There's how much time you spent on it. There's profitability. Those are data sets which we've talked about before, and we'll come on to them in future. But then the client data, I can't sell that because that's private, right? If you mention the word data, there everyone gets GDPR alarm bells and panics and says, I can't do anything with the data. Yeah. Well, that's not true, is it?
No. I mean, this is data that you have to look at first what you're taking, but can this data be anonymized so that it's not traceable back to individuals? And I would think in a lot of cases that is the case. So we'll take something like conveyancing, for instance, and other house sales and things like that. Information that you can gather from these are the locations of where these sales took place, like the general areas. You can gather how long they took to actually go through. You can pick out, are there certain times in the year when people buy houses? Is there certain crunch points in that? Everyone knows that you get to sort of Christmas time and suddenly there's loads of stuff to finish up before everyone breaks for the holidays and things like that. But actually, what does the data say? Are there particular times of the year that are more likely for house sales or other conveyancing work? How long do these things take? What are the sticking points in there? Yeah. All of that data isn't about an individual. It's about the whole thing, about the whole process as a whole.
But your immediate reaction, or my immediate reaction, is I've got all this data. I can't sell it to anyone. If it's anonymized, I still can't really do anything with it, because who's my audience? Who's my customer?
Who cares about this stuff?
Yeah, I can't sell that to an estate agent because they probably know as well as I do, or they probably have a relatively good feel for it, such that they're not going to pay me for a data set. So maybe it's not necessarily about collecting data and selling it, which might be what Netflix were doing with the recording film studios by sending them information about what is well received and what isn't. Maybe it's more about collecting information on your business so that you can run your business more efficiently. Yeah, and scale it up and down to deal with trends and so on as you see them coming in.
Yeah, and it's understanding those trends, then, isn't it? So that you're not caught by surprise. Okay, that at Christmas time you're going to have to employ someone else to help with these, a couple more members of staff to help with the backlog and things like that. Yeah. But actually, can you look at the trends throughout the year and decide, okay, actually, there's certain points in the year when I know that I'm going to need someone. In these other times I don't. Does that mean that I get someone on as a temporary basis, or could you employ people to cover those sort of crunch points who could then be assigned to other tasks, or even there's a lot of talk in here about managed services and stuff like that. Is this a way of scaling up to launch legal managed services where you understand within your own business the trends of when people are busy, so that that in these other times we have capacity to sort of outsource work and outsource our staff to do other pieces of work? That may be a possibility.
Yeah, absolutely. It feels like, though, with lawyers, you are so specialized in your various niches that perhaps you can't lend your skill set to other disciplines. And maybe that's true, maybe not. It's certainly at the beginning of your career, I think it's probably less true when you're still finding your feet. When you get a bit more aged, then maybe it's less true. But maybe there are alternatives, like saying to your customers, do you know what, actually we've got some spare capacity here. Would you like to have someone come and work in-house for you for a short period of time? And there are discussions to have about how that's paid for. Maybe when you're looking at your admin team, though, they are much more flexible. Maybe the admin team is international and all across the world, and actually you could move projects to a different part of the world depending on how busy certain areas are. Yeah. So I guess it depends how big you are and what your team looks like. But the point, I suppose, is if you don't have the information, then you can't make any of those decisions. You're not informed at all.
Exactly. I think that's the key thing here is that, we talk about data, but actually the only way you can act on that data and the only way you can monitor those kind of trends is if you're capturing this stuff.
Yeah.
We all look at the normal transactional data as the key thing here. I mean, I would imagine that most people implementing systems at the moment are looking at sort of the time recording systems, the budgeting systems, to integrating all that together so you can tell exactly how much time was spent, how much did it cost me, how much money did I make of it. And those are the key things. But do these systems that you're implementing allow you to delve a bit deeper into that? It's been one of the principles that we've looked at for when we're thinking about our platform that we're building, is that we want to capture as much information as we can to give you a more holistic overview of what you're seeing. So if you're using something like a document automation platform, that's fantastic. It's speeding up the process of actually completing your documents and making sure that they're all showing the correct information and there's no mistakes on that front. But is it also allowing you to track particular clauses in that document, how often that clause gets changed? Does that always become a sticking point in that document? Is it saying, okay, I'm able to look at various, key bits of information of, it took me 2 days to complete this document, but where particularly was I focused on for those 2 days? Did one aspect of this document take 1.5 days and the rest of it took half a day to complete? So it's getting that much more fine-grained data from it. And for most systems, they can't capture that kind of information.
Well, I was going to say, that sounds like a really long-winded and difficult project to do, which I suppose it would be if your data is stored as it normally is, like we've talked about before, in an Excel spreadsheet somewhere or in a Word document. And I suppose
the universal storage platform, Excel,
When we're storing or thinking about capturing this data, we are not talking about creating a spreadsheet with 20,000 lines going across the top and 50,000 lines going down. We're talking about a much more clever solution than that. We're talking about something which is extracting and holding on to the data and maybe populating things using that data, right? So it's a sort of reversal, if I can put it that way. It means you can get access to it. So it means that if you're a corporate lawyer and you're doing share purchase agreements all the time, and you say, well, what's a normal share purchase agreement, or what have I typically agreed in terms of the warranties? You say 90% of my deals contain these warranties in it. This particular warranty is just never accepted. And, that is very, very easy where that information is held within a database rather than having to go away and extract it and pull it out. So I guess that's a bit of a it's coming at that whole idea of an AI solution to read your documents from another angle, isn't it? It's rather than saying I want to read what's already available, you're saying no, actually I want to be able to read what I'm putting into it. That you're coming at it from a totally different direction.
So one of the things, and it's one of the aspects that a lot of new startups are looking into. There's a huge amount of options on the market now for AI solutions that will read documentation and clauses and things and extract that data from it. Maybe there's opportunities here whereby when you're actually sending your documents to other firms, to individuals and stuff, that along with that comes an accompanying data set of that information, which is also digitally signed, so you know that it can be valid and stuff. But in there, you're not picking out the sort of the whole terms, you're just picking out the key components of the data. For something like a house sale, it's the addresses, it's the parties involved, it's the monetary information of how much these cost. Those kind of bits of data which are useful for analysis in other places,
Mm.
but don't need the additional terms associated with them. And I think that's the key thing, is that I think there's always going to be a place for both.
Yeah.
You're going to need the finalized document, which has all that information, it has the terms in it. But you can also distribute just the key data points as well for use in another system. And therefore, you remove the reliance on having to build AI solutions to read through all these documents, because actually I'm using a system whereby they just give me that information along with the document.
Yeah.
So those can be stored together.
Well, hopefully it means if people are thinking about buying AI solutions and they're expensive, if you consider using a platform which allows you to enter data in at the beginning, it might be that you can grow your data features and your data cell, if you like, at the same rate and at the same time as your AI solution. And we talked about before, the building of the trust in the AI solution, that those things are starting together, because the AI is useless without the data.
Yeah.
It's just that you're putting it into the AI solution in a different way rather than sort of programming it to do it on something which already exists.
Yeah. Yeah,
so it's a different scaling model.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic, and I think people are beginning to look into these areas, but there is still a tendency that the document is king in the legal industry, and that's, I would imagine that's going to be a difficult thing to break, and I don't necessarily think it needs to be broken entirely. I think the document will always rule things, but I think there's the opportunity to distribute more information along with it so that it can be more easily analysed, and then you're not just looking at the simple transaction data. You've got other things you can analyse and look into when you're doing these things. It's certainly an interesting subject, and something that I think we'll have to approach again, because it's becoming more and more key, and you probably know from your own experience, when people are, it's not just about having this data as well, it's about who's the right audience for it and what are you trying to show. Not everyone in your organization needs to see the same level of information.
Absolutely true, yeah. And in many respects, accessibility to information and data is, it isn't necessarily for running big data type analytics on it. Sometimes it's for day-to-day answering of questions. And so clients that come to you and say, can you tell me where we're up to on our files? If they've got 10 files, now that's a hard question to answer because it's quite a wide and open one, but you can generally make clients quite happy by giving them an update on 10 files with 10 lines fairly quickly, especially if you can pull it off straight away, rather than having to review 10 files. So if the information is held elsewhere and you're able to track the progress of a transaction because the status updates are held within the platform rather than things being held within an Excel spreadsheet where you're tracking how progressed documents are, having the information within a platform that allows you to run the analytics on it quickly there's your example of why it's good for the clients. I mean, that's how you make money out of these things, I suppose. You run a better service for your customers ultimately, and you make them happier by responding more quickly. So
interesting.
Okay, so we just quickly run on to events now. We'll start to wrap up. We mentioned in week 2 about the startup law by Buckworth. That's at the Google campus. Just a reminder, that's the 25th of April, 6:30 till 8:30. They're talking about what you need to know if you're planning to create a startup.
If you're a startup, what are the legal things you need to think about when bringing that?
Incorporating and so on.
Yep.
But a couple of other events that we wanted to mention to you. These fit in actually quite neatly with the data stuff we were talking about earlier, and whether you hold stuff in documents and whether the document is king. There's a couple of blockchain events that we think you should know about. The first one is the 25th to the 26th of April, so it's 2 days, the Blockchain Expo at London Olympia. The website, if you want, it will be in the notes, but it's blockchain-expo.com. They've got lots of interesting people attending. Dell, PwC, KPMG, we talked about the accountancy firms earlier. NatWest, Bank of England, Pfizer, Sainsbury's. I mean, there's a whole host of blue chip household names on their website. Go and have a look at that. And then item number 2, also blockchain, 26th to the 27th of June, also London Olympia. blockchainsumitlondon.com. Attendees, Barclays, Citibank, Land Registry, and the European Commission. Do you think they'll still be allowed to go?
Well, it's a bit touch and go at the moment, isn't it? What's at the end of June?
End of June.
Well, I think...
Will we have left the European Union?
Yeah, who knows at the moment? I don't think anyone knows what's happening on that front, do we?
Maybe we could ask for everyone's thoughts on whether we will have Brexited by that point.
Yes, who knows?
Who knows? But anyway, a similar sort of range of blue chip attendees. So blockchain is something which is, we talked about it in week one. It's a buzzword. We are going to cover it in some detail because whether you've seen anything on it or not, it is talked about a lot. And, we think we need to sort of lift the hood on that one a bit.
Yeah, it's a really interesting subject. I mean, there's these blockchain expos and there's this blockchain summit and things going on. And there's a huge amount of talk about blockchain in the industry. But other than within things like cryptocurrencies and things like that, where are the products that have come out from blockchain? I'm sure they're out there and stuff, but we hear a lot about new AI solutions and on a constant basis, and there's actual startups pushing that stuff out there now. But the blockchain side of things is talked a huge amount, and everyone's saying that you must be doing it. But I just don't see the actual products and solutions coming out of it, and I think there's a lot of we need to discuss whether blockchain is the best solution in all circumstances. It's talked about as almost like a silver bullet to solve all your solutions, and that's just not the case.
No.
It is appropriate in certain situations, and there is a huge amount that can be done with it, and it's something that needs to be invested in and needs to be looked at. But actually, are people thinking there's more there than there actually is?
Yeah.
It's definitely something that we want to pick up
just briefly.
Later date.
Yeah, just briefly for people who don't really understand what blockchain is. It's this idea of a distributed ledger, isn't it? So it's multiple people looking at the same thing, and that inherently, to me, as a non-technical expert, brings with it a whole discussion of whether you can do that under GDPR, and there will be lots of different views on that, and we'll get some of them.
Yeah,
it's a huge talking point, and there's lots of twists and turns to it, which I think we'll just have to spend quite a bit of time on. So I've seen some articles about there being a potential a conflict between whether you can do a blockchain, a genuine blockchain, and as a law firm, and whether you should or not is another thing. But what purpose does it serve? But whether you can do that and still remain compliant with GDPR when you're effectively that data is being checked and absorbed by potentially third parties is a tricky one.
Yeah, it's definitely a tricky subject. And when you're talking about, moving away from, what it was intended to do in the first place, blockchain was intended to be a public, distributed ledger. That's what it's fundamentally. When we talk about it in a legal sense, and we're thinking maybe in certain circumstances that's not appropriate and it has to be tweaked and changed. Is it really still blockchain at that point?
It's just a private store. Yeah.
So it's a hugely interesting subject, and I think it's something that we need to pull out and have a bigger discussion and let us know. Is that something that you want to hear about?
Yeah, I want to hear from people who know about blockchain, who have feelings on it, who are using it, people who have thought about it and discounted it, people who are experts in GDPR and know whether you can do what you can and can't do with it. So if you are any of those things, let us know. Get in touch.
Yeah, definitely.
And to do that, you go to any of the pages we mentioned earlier, or preferably email panachecast@panachesoftware.com.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's it for our this week's show. So again, thank you for joining in, listening, and listening and watching. And if you have feedback, and just get in contact with us about anything we've talked about in the show, anything you'd like to hear us talk about as well.
Indeed. Yeah, we'd like to hear from you.
Yeah. So
great.
Until next week.
Yep.
We'll see you then. Thanks then.
Bye.
Bye.